Welcome back to No Sleep Teal. Travis Reier back with you on the Reier on YouTube channel. It is a Friday. The Jacksonville Jaguars working through day 3 of 2024 training camp at the Miller Electric Center, the practice fields down there on the banks of the St. Johns River. The weather this morning about what you would expect for late July: muggy, hot, basically perfect training camp conditions, especially if you're sitting up in the covered bleachers with those big fans blowing on you. Really nice up there from a fan perspective. But we've got observations galore for you following Friday's practice, and we'll get right to those. We'll work through pretty much the periods of note during the workout, and got to understand too, still in an acclimation period for this football team. So practices 1 through 3, you're not going to have any live contact. It's going to be more like mini camp, more like OTAs. Then you get to practices 4 and 5, which are coming up immediately on the horizon, and you're allowed to have shells for a full speed practice. And then day 6, you have a mandatory off day that'll come up here in the next couple of days. And then practice 6, you can have full pads. So there you go. That's where the Jaguars are at in terms of the acclimation period. And what we saw on Friday morning after individual periods, pretty interesting, good stuff as far as one-on-ones with wide receivers and tight ends working against corners and safeties, and running backs working against linebackers. And Jags had that going on both practice fields. You had Trevor Lawrence on one side throughout this period, and he was joined by either Mac Jones or CJ Beathard, the two backup quarterbacks alternating with Trevor over there. And some of the offensive highlights, and there really should be a lot of offensive highlights in one-on-ones. You almost feel bad for the defensive players because, first of all, the receivers, the backs, they know exactly where they're going. There's not a pass rush. The offensive players are working with a lot of times at least a half of the field. So it's a real distinct disadvantage for the defense. But once again, on Friday, there were some defensive highlights, even from one-on-ones. But for the offense, we did see Seth Williams, the Auburn product from a few years ago, get deep, and Trevor hit him with a really nice ball. Williams, though, has that size and that length. He was able to lay out, make a nice catch on the football. Unfortunately for Seth Williams, looked like he may have landed on the ball and completing the catch, and was down for a brief period of time before bouncing up and jumping back to the wide receivers and trying to get back into drills. You also had Mac Jones getting deep to Devin Duvernay against Gregory Jr., the defensive back, in coverage right there. Nice ball from Mac to Duvernay. And then also CJ Beathard. I thought he had a good workout on Thursday, followed that up on Friday, working a rail route to Tank Bigsby out of the backfield. Again, tough situation for any inside linebacker to find himself in with a back one-on-one, and that was Caleb Johnson's situation with this particular play. And Beathard hit Bigsby in stride on the deep ball. Now, defensively, Andrew Wingard, man, showed up once again at the safety position very early on in one-on-ones. He essentially ran the corner route for tight end Patrick Murtaugh. Murtaugh trying to work inside, stem, then get to the corner, but Wingard wasn't having any of it. He picks off the CJ Beathard pass. I didn't even think it was really a bad ball from CJ Beathard. It's just that Wingard played it so perfectly and won early against Murtaugh in terms of gaining leverage against that route. You also had a very nice pass breakup by Andre Cisco working one-on-one against tight end Brenton Strange on an outcut. Ronald Darby, a guy that we've talked a lot about so far in this training camp, he had a pick of Mac Jones in one-on-ones. And I thought Foye Oluokun early, he was victimized by Dearness Johnson. And Dearness Johnson is one of these running backs, if you're a linebacker, an inside linebacker, you don't want to see in this period. But Oluokun answered with a takeaway of his own a little while later. So, as you would expect from the veteran, the leader, if you do get him once, you're probably not going to get Foye twice. And so from there, the Jags moved into some 11 on 11. And again, we'll work offense to defense. Had a really nice deep ball from Mac to Denzel Mims off of play action. And covering Mac at Alabama like I did, the play was eerily reminiscent of what we saw him really capitalize on with the Crimson Tide. Now, he had Devontae Smith, he had John Mechie, had some great receivers, as we know, to work with on those routes, but it was deep, hard play action. And then Mac with the perfect ball there early on in 11 on 11. Trevor Lawrence a little while later misses Evan Ingram in the middle of the field. Been a little bit of that for Trevor through the first 3 days. I thought it was a better day for Trevor overall. You didn't have the takeaway issues or the turnover issues, but still just a little bit off. And you got to understand too, still some installation going on, still some connections that you're trying to perfect. I guess the ones that stand out are the ones like to Ingram, because those guys are tight. I mean, it goes beyond even football for them. You don't expect to see Trevor missing Evan Ingram on those kind of routes, but it happens from time to time, especially early in camp. I liked also what we saw from the backs in the passing game. Now, a couple guys struggled catching the football at times. Etienne had a drop. I think D'Ernest had a drop at different stages in the practice, but you can see how a guy like Keelan Robinson, the draft pick out of Texas, can be utilized on offense, not just as a return option. You had a throwback sort of screen out to the left to Keelan Robinson that looked really good from CJ Beathard. I thought Tank Bigsby, obviously, until you get into full pad work, you're not going to make, again, a lot of definitive statements about the run game, whether it's being able to run it or stop the run. But Bigsby had a really nice cutback on one run that I think regardless was going to be an explosive play. And then, defensively, as we talked about yesterday, more mix in the secondary, pairing guys in different combinations. Daniel Thomas working with Andre Cisco at safety. You continue to see Wingard back there at times with Andre Cisco. It's a very, very big mix that's going on. And I think that's going to continue to be the case until you get more into full pad work and start looking ahead to actual matchups in the preseason. But you had Jarian Jones working at corner during 11 on 11 earlier. We'll talk about Jarian Jones come up in a little bit because he didn't finish practice. Neither did Tyson Campbell. So you were down a couple of corners as you got later into like 7 on 7 and more 11 on 11 work later. You had some Christian Braswell working there at the slot corner to support Darnell Savage. Ronald Darby's a constant at this point. I thought it was also interesting defensively in the first run through 11 on 11. You saw some Chad Muma in the base defense with Foye and Devin Lloyd. So that caught my attention there about the midsection of practice. And you also had in this phase of 11 on 11, you had a big man touchdown. You had a throwback from Mac Jones that went off wide receiver Austin Trammell before landing in the awaiting hands of number 99, Jeremiah Ledbetter, who looked like he knew what to do with it after the takeaway and running down that right sideline. That obviously generated a lot of excitement from his defensive teammates and the crowd that had assembled. Another big crowd down there at Miller Electric Center on Friday too. So from there, you go into some 7 on 7. And we talk about constants in the secondary that we've seen the first 3 days. And, I think you're talking about Ronald Darby at a corner. I think you're talking about obviously Tyson at a corner. You're talking about Andre Cisco at a safety. And of course, you're also talking about Darnell Savage to this point when it comes to the slot corner position. But some of the things that we saw in 7 on 7, a couple of drops that we talked about with D'Ernest Johnson and Etienne. Brian Thomas Jr. got nice separation. I know we've asked the question of consistency with Brian Thomas Jr. the last few days here on No Sleep Teal, but it looked like something we saw against Air early in practice on Friday was going to carry over into 7 on 7, because against Air, we saw Trevor and Brian Thomas hit this route. In 7 on 7, it didn't happen. It was an overthrow by Trevor. I guess perhaps Brian Thomas Jr.'s route wasn't exactly what Trevor was looking for. It's hard to say, but It was a pretty wide missed connection between the two right there in the middle of the field. I thought you also had some good situations, like you have a good throw, you have good coverage. And I thought that showed up. Trevor trying to work to Evan on the outside. I thought he threw a pretty good ball because Cisco kind of undercut it. It looked like Evan was going to be able to finish it over on the sideline. That did not happen. And then he had a nice sequence from Mac in the 7-on-7 too. He hit Josiah DeGuara, the tight end, on a crossing route, and then he followed that up with the deep ball to Duvernay. That was very pretty. Duvernay, man, just can really go. And there are some things, I know you look at that sort of spot in the rotation and you think Parker Washington and and they're similar. I get that, but there's also been some things that we've seen where Washington and Duvernay are on the field together. If guys are dynamic and playmakers, you can figure it out from a formation perspective. And so from 7-on-7, we went back into 11-on-11. And what you saw to open that period defensively was Monteric Brown at the corner, because as we talked about earlier, at that point, you're not seeing Tyson Campbell during the practice and you're not seeing Jarian Jones. Now, I know we're going to get to the injury situation coming up as we wrap up the show today. But I think it's important to note it's not like Campbell and Jarian Jones left the practice field altogether. They were able to stay out there, which certainly leads you to believe whatever they're dealing with is minor in nature. You don't like to see it, obviously, with Tyson, because he's been, when we've seen him the first couple of 3 days, he's just been absolutely locked down. I think Jarian Jones has shown you a lot of the qualities and attributes you were hoping you would see from the Florida State prospect early on. But, that was kind of the situation at corner with Darby at the other side. You did have Wingard out there first to go along with Andre Cisco. Obviously, you're still thinking that Antonio Johnson is going to be very much in that mix for a lot of playing time, if not the starting position outright. I know a lot of folks have gone ahead, and we've probably done that to an extent, even here on our show, sort of handed the job to Antonio Johnson as that other safety. But again, Wingard is doing nothing to take himself out of the mix as of this time. So we're not quite there yet when it comes to making that call, but good competition. And that's obviously what Ryan Nielsen wants at a variety of positions. Offensively, some things I liked from the extended 11-on-11 to end practice. And I talked about this yesterday, and I think even the earlier you can do it in games, the better with Trevor. Get him on the move by design. And we saw it on a couple of throws in the 11-on-11 from Trevor. Good stuff with Evan. Good stuff with Luke Farrell. You had Trevor off of design movement to Ingram working against Darnell Savage, which just sort of underscores the advantage you have with a guy like Evan Ingram and the stress it puts on defenses to declare, okay, when the Jags are in what is technically 11 personnel, one back, one tight end, if that's how you define Ingram as a defense, well, then you gotta play nickel against him, and really you almost feel like you got to play dime with him out there in a 3 wide receiver set, because as he showed, he can beat a lot of nickels from that inside position as well. You also had, again, sticking with the design movement theme with Trevor that I can't get enough of, zone read action, and then Trevor comes back and hits Christian Kirk on a crossing route, and Christian hits the burners after the catch. Just really like to see that stuff with Trevor Lawrence. I know sort of his idol is Peyton Manning, and look, it's important that Trevor continue to develop from the cup, from the pocket. But just in terms of his skill set and kind of what fits him well, no problem. Love to see him. And I think there's probably a part of Trevor that enjoys it. It fits him extremely well when they're able to get him on the move. And I know you can't do it every play, but the more you can mix it in probably earlier to get him going and feeling good, and get the ball to the guys you want to get it to, like Evan. I mean, right now, I can't envision a scenario where Evan Ingram doesn't put up a stat line similar to what we saw last year, because that's Trevor's guy to me, is Evan Ingram. And then you hope, of course, that Christian Kirk stays healthy and Gabe Davis stays healthy and Brian Thomas continues to develop. And, I think Thomas is going to get there. We talked about this extensively yesterday, but there is a delineation in this latest draft between that top tier of wide receivers. When you talk about Udunzi, when you talk about Harrison, and when you talk about Neighbors and sort of that next group. And that's kind of where Brian was. And that's why the Jags were able to get him where they were able to get him. And, it might just take a little bit of time. But if nothing else, his speed and his vertical ability is going to add something to this offense. I don't doubt that very much, to say the least. So we talked earlier about the injury situation. I'm going to pull this tweet up, and let's see here. This is from Demetrius Harvey, who does an outstanding job covering the Jacksonville Jaguars on a daily basis for Jacksonville.com. And a lot of this we saw during the workout itself. I'll say this: Cam Robinson looks great. And so in a year in which he obviously has a lot of incentive to look great and play great, I think he's been a positive. We talked about the Seth Williams situation. Yeah, that lines up. It did look like he landed perhaps on the football after making that diving catch. Jarian Jones, we talked about Tyson Campbell. Tyson Campbell right now, if there's anything bothering Tyson Campbell, I don't think you stress him very much and try to get him back on the football field as quickly as possible. Obviously, he's got to get his work. You got to get him where he needs to be going into the season. But for the way he has looked in the first two plus practices, you're good at that corner. Ronald Darby at the other corner has been encouraging, but you've got to continue to identify and develop depth beyond those first couple of corners. And so no need, again, to put too much on Tyson Campbell if he isn't feeling it. Jarian Jones, like I said earlier, stayed out there throughout the 11-on-11 to the end of practice. So this isn't a situation. Seth Williams came back. It in a situation where guys that we're talking about here with those two or three needed to leave the practice field altogether. All right, that's going to do it for a Friday edition of No Sleep Teal. Travis Reier, thanking you once again for joining us right here on Reier on YouTube. That's the channel. If you haven't liked the programs as of yet, we hope you'll give this a thumbs up. We hope you'll subscribe to the channel. And we also would love for you to then turn on your notifications, so then you get all of our content as it drops right here on Reier on YouTube. Travis, thanking you once again. And until next time, so long, everybody.